think that also puts him in the same timeline as like people like Isaiah and Hosea, and so and that's interesting because that's a time period where the world just kind of just shifts in its paradigm for all these ideas. But my question is before we continue is why do people think that he's born in 1500 BC? What is it? Where did that even come from? Do you know?
Yeah, linguistics alone. And so let me say one other thing about this. There is no other evidence based really, upon which to base this thesis other than linguistics. In other words, the fact that the idiom of the Gathas is
So it's very ancient.
similar to Rig Vedic Sanskrit. Okay, but look at Latin.
Yeah.
So, we have René Descartes in the 1600s, late 1500s, early 1600s, early 1600s. We have René Descartes composing in Latin.
That's true.
Latin was used by, scholars throughout the whole Middle Ages, 1,000 years after the fall of the Roman Empire, and of Latin having been used as a living spoken language. So, okay,
and
Latin
before the Common Era, Cicero's writing in Latin.
Exactly. So Latin was a dead language for 1,000 years or more.
Point.
By the time that it was still being used as a language that would confer a degree of scholastic authority on a person composing a text, either theological or intellectual authority was conveyed by composing in this dead language of Latin. So why wouldn't we think that a Mede or Persian, it's debatable which Zarathustra was, he was an Iranian in any case, these are two different branches of the Iranian family, the Medes and the Persians, and the Scythians. These were the three major branches, okay, of the Iranian family in those days. So why would we not think that a Mede or a Persian might use this dead language, which was the language of the Magi, and of the Rig Vedic priests, to confer authority upon the text that he was composing? Whereas it wasn't his spoken living language. For all we know, the guy spoke Persian.
Good point. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So now that now we're in the time period, we sort of understand the context, and let's go from there. What stems from this sort of age of Zarathustra?
Right. So his message is absolutely revolutionary. To understand that, we need to just take a quick look again, or have a refresher, because your audience, I'm sure, is largely familiar with this. But let's just have a refresher of the basics of Greek theology, ancient Greek theology, and how it lines up with the other end of the Indo-European spectrum, namely Vedic theology. So one thing that the Greeks and their Eastern brothers still agreed on round about 600 BC was that the beings worthy of worship are these gods, right? The Greeks, worship these Olympian gods, and in the Vedic pantheon, you have their analog in terms of the Devas, led by Indra, and Indra is Zeus. Right. Okay, it's a very direct.
Dies Pater is it?
Dies Pater is Indra. And, so the Olympian pantheon and the Vedic pantheon are very much, the same, and they devolved from a primordial Indo-European religion, a single primordial Indo-European religion. We know this through linguistics and anthropology and archaeology.
Just the fact that Dies Pater shows up in Spain and Italy and also all the way in India, there you go. You have a clear something to look at. You have tangible something to look at that shows you this is a widespread ancient language that's spread across the entire hemisphere.
Yeah, he's a thunderbolt wielding sky father, warlord deity. That's Indra or Zeus. And he leads this pantheon, okay? And there are these sacrificial priests who are orienting all of human worship toward this pantheon, and humanity has this subservient, not to say servile, relationship to these gods who are extremely tyrannical and capricious and, frankly, at times sadistic. And this is true both in, Greek religion and ancient Vedic religion. And then there's another class of beings that you see both in Greek religion and Vedic religion, and those are the Titans. And these Titans are opposed to the gods. The Vedic people called them Asuras. And this is very significant because the chief deity of Zarathustra is Ahura Mazda. And Ahura, just like, Gita and Gatha, Ahura is the Iranian cognate of the Vedic Ashura. So Ahura Mazda, Mazda means wisdom. Ahura Mazda is the Titan or the Ashura of wisdom. So right away, what Zarathustra is doing is inverting the entire theological worldview of the Indo-Europeans 180 degrees. He preaches in the Gathas that the Devas are sadistic, tyrannical, and above all, deceptive. He says that their chief attribute is duruj, or the lie. They're great deceivers, and they're oppressors of mankind. And above all, they're trying to deny us wisdom and knowledge. So we ought to align ourselves with titanic wisdom and rebel against these gods. So it's a message of insurrection that we find in the Gathas. Insurrection against the entire heavenly order, which was common to the Greeks and the Vedic people. Okay? So you can see why this guy had to flee for his life.
Right.
Yeah.
Now,
So,
who would if Ahura Mazda is there a god in the ancient Greek pantheon that relates to?
hell yeah, there is. Hell yeah, there is.
Can I guess? Is it Aranos?
No.
Okay.
But it's interesting because I'll say something about Uranos later in a moment, in response to this. But okay, so let's lay this out really briefly for a minute. And I'm going to come back to these attributes of Ahura Mazda momentarily, but just to answer your question. First of all, we've got the name Titan of Wisdom. Okay, who's a Titan? Who's associated with wisdom? Second, the chief attribute of Ahura Mazda is forward thinking or thinking ahead, sepanta minu, and I'll come back to this. Thinking, whoa, wait a minute, thinking ahead. And number three, what is the element that symbolizes cosmic order? That's an expression of the mind of Ahura Mazda? Fire, an ever-burning fire.
I got it.
Oh, okay. So who is Ahura Mazda? Prometheus.
Yeah.
Okay. Clearly, Ahura Mazda is a philosophical concept that's been developed on the basis of an older Indo-European myth of Prometheus, which you find in its original form, not in Greece, but in Iran.
He's the creator too.
Yeah, and he's the creator. He's the creator of mankind. Okay, he's the creator. He created us in his image.
People forget about that.
To think for ourselves and not to worship these tyrannical Olympians. We'll come back to that.
Sure.
But the myth of Prometheus, a lot of people might not realize, doesn't come from Greece. It comes from Iran originally. The whole Caucasus was part of Iran until the Russian czars took it from Iran in the 1800s.
Wow, that's a long time.
Okay, so the Caucasus is the cradle of Iranian civilization. And the myth of Prometheus in its original form is still found in the Caucasus in terms of the cult of Amirani. There's this figure called Amirani, and he's clearly, if you look at the structure of the myth, he's Prometheus, and they still worship him in the folk religion of Georgia. And there are statues of him in the countrysides of Georgia and the Caucasus Mountains, where, of course, Prometheus is chained. In the myth, Prometheus, when he's punished by Zeus, he's chained to the Caucasus Mountains, right? And so the whole ancient Indo-European fire cult of Prometheus, I believe, was the raw material with which Zarathustra was working when he developed this philosophically complex notion of Ahura Mazda.
That's fascinating.
But I mentioned forethought. So Ahura Mazda emanates 7 powers or 7 facets of his divine intelligence. And these are called the Amesha Spentas. And the fact that it's 7 is going to be relevant to our discussion of Zarathustra's influence on Gnosticism. Okay, so bear that in mind. So there are these 7 powers, and the foremost of these is Sepanta Minu, which, as I mentioned, is translated into Greek as Prometheia, forward thinking, thinking ahead. The progressive mentality is one good translation of it. Sepanta, progressive, forward-oriented. Minu, mentality, mind. Sepanto Minu. And this is the foremost of the 7 powers that express, Ahura Mazda in the cosmos. The second one is something called Asha Vahishta. And Asha became Arta in the language of the Persian Empire. And this means cosmic order. It's basically the Greek notion cosmos, which, by the way, had not been formed yet at that time. It's going to be formed, as we'll discuss, in Heraclitus. So this notion of cosmic order is the second manifestation of this, of Ahura Mazda, Asha Vahishta. It means the best order, literally. That's the translation of it. Asha, order, Vahishta, the best, namely cosmic order. Then we've got, and very significantly, let me not gloss over the fact that Asha Vahishta is symbolized by fire. That's the ever-burning fire, which always changes its forms, but it's the same substrate. In other words, energy. Energy, the cosmos is basically as ever-transforming energy.
Is this that monad that people attribute to his teachings?
We'll get into that. I think that in my view, Zarathustra is neither a monist nor a dualist.
Okay.
His view is more nuanced than that. But I think that his view influenced both monism and it influenced both the Valentinian type of Gnosticism and also the Manichaean dualistic type of Gnosticism. Okay, so then the third one after Asha Vahishta, we could say is Vohumana. And Vohumana means the best thinking, the best thinking. And notice Humana in Vohumana, Humana becomes humanitas. Vohumana, the best thinking, is the means whereby we become truly human. Unless you cultivate Vohumana, you're not really a human being. You're an animal that walks on 2 legs. Okay, so this notion that became prominent in the Roman Empire of humanitas being something that is not necessarily inherent, shouldn't be taken for granted, but something that has to be, cultivated. This is a notion that goes back to Zarathustra's concept of Vohumana, one of the 7 Amesha Spentas or emanations of Ahura Mazda. Then we've got Haurvatat. And so, there's a certain internal logic to this. When you cultivate Vohumana, or the best thinking, you are aligning yourself with Asha Vahishta, with cosmic order. And when you align yourself with cosmic order through the best thinking, then you also wind up becoming a vehicle or channel for the progressive force in the cosmos, namely Sepantaminu. This progressive mentality starts to become the dominant spirit of your life as you align yourself with cosmic order through the best thinking. That's how Spentaminu, Asha Vahishta, and Vohumana are connected. And then when you start to come into this alignment through the cultivation of, your human potential for rationality, and intellection, then you attain a series of other attributes. One of them is Haurvatat, which means wholeness. Wholeness in the sense that the word health used to mean, to be hale or whole. And this kind of wholeness was symbolized by water in, early Zoroastrianism, which I think is where the baptism idea comes from in Christianity. This baptism, submersion in water as a symbol of conferring wholeness upon a person. Then another attribute that follows from cultivating the best thinking is Ameratat, which is often translated as immortality. And people connect this to like the Taoist notion of longevity. But actually the word Ameratat means deathlessness. Meratat, mer is like a cognate of, mort in French, or, it's our word for mortality. You can see how it, meratat, mortality, right? So it's a meratat, a mortality, deathlessness.
Immortal.
Immortal, right? But it could just mean like vitality.
Right.
Right? But coming from out of the power and grip of death and being very vital. So vitality and wholeness coming from cultivating the best thinking. And then
this is where you get the idea of apotheosis later on in these Gnostics. Makes sense.
Yeah. And then you have spenta armaiti, which is tranquility, serenity, poise, kind of, deep grace and groundedness. And whereas Ameratat is symbolized by vegetation, spenta armaiti is symbolized by the earth, the element of earth. So grounded serenity and tranquility coming from being well-rooted through, the cultivation of the best thinking and the wholeness or health and vitality that comes from it. And then finally, Vohu Kshatra is the last of these 7 attributes or emanations of Ahura Mazda. And that means the best dominion, or the ideal governance, or, the most righteous form of rule. And so this is another thing which, if if we can keep it in mind to come back to, is important in terms of teasing out the distinctions between Zarathustra's teaching and the various forms of Gnosticism that were deeply influenced by it. Because in Gnosticism, and we can flesh this out later, there is this inherent critique of power, where all power is archontic, and generally all political regimes are inherently bound for corruption and so forth. Not so in Zarathustra's vision. In Zarathustra is the first utopian, and he believes that there can be an ideal form of government based on the governance of the wise, from which Plato later gets his idea of the philosopher kings and so on and so forth.
Right.
These are the 7 major attributes of the teachings of Zarathustra. But there's other points I want to get to that we find in the Gathas as well. But just if you want to have any reflections and commentary on that before we continue.
Let's see. So yeah, so he's spreading these ideas, and how do we get from that to having like separate different types forms of Gnosticism that spread as far as Greece? Like, how do these ideas get fleshed out?
Yeah, okay. So before we head to the influence on, and let me just lay out a few other important points, okay? Because they're going to be vital to the impact of Zarathustra's thinking on Gnosticism. One is that there's a counterforce to, I was about to say to Ahura Mazda, because this is how the Gnostics interpret this counterforce. But really, it's a counterforce to Sepanta Minu, to this, the 7th power, or the main attribute of Ahura Mazda, and that counterforce is called Angra Minu. So you have Sepanta Minu and Angra Minu, and this Angra Minu is later contracted linguistically to Ahriman.
Right.
So Angra Minu literally means the constricted, constrained mentality. Angera, gera in Persian means knotted up, like,